Okay, please come and sit down.
Okay. Thank you. Everybody, let's take our seats.
Once upon a time, a group of zoologists who study animals was in the Serengeti plains of Africa, and they tried to figure out a way to identify the leader of the pack in whatever grouping of animals it was. And they finally came up and discovered a way, and they said that the leader always turns toward danger. Whenever there's danger that threatens the pack, the leader turns toward the danger. So for example, if you had a herd of gazelles and the lions are stalking, or the cheetahs are stalking the gazelles, they will smell and the herd will begin to move away from the lion. They'll start to move away, and then you'll see the leader. The leader will emerge from the grazing animals and put himself between the animals that are fleeing and the predator, the lion or the cheetah. Extremely dangerous position to be in, but they will threaten to attack the lion or the cheetah until the rest of the flock gets away, and then the leader will follow the flock. So you can always tell the leader in life, because the leader turns toward danger. They do the things that cause them natural fear. But they go through the fear anyway. In the papers about every so often you read a story about someone who received the Congressional Medal of Honor for valor above and beyond the call of duty in the face of the enemy. I don't know if you read these stories, and some of the stories bring tears to your eyes. Where these people in combat, they were wounded, they went out under fire, they got shot again to drag their people, they continued to fire to save their guys, and so on and so forth, and they got a Congressional Medal of Honor. One time in their lives, they engaged in an act of great bravery, and they were remembered for it forever. But salespeople engage in an act of great bravery every single time you pick up the phone or knock on the door, because you're not facing physical danger, you're facing emotional danger, which is sometimes greater. You're facing rejection and failure and disappointment and loss. Well, we have someone to speak to you today who has gone up against the enemy, which is the skeptical customer, has gone up against the enemy time after time after time after time. And it's easy, in a way, to be brave once, but to be brave day after day, hour after hour, like Dustin and others, year after year, to keep going out there and calling on people and risking and the danger of rejection and fear and disappointment, that takes a tremendous amount of courage, far more than the people who receive the wonderful awards from the government. So I'd like to introduce you to my son, Michael, who I'm very proud of. And Michael has been out there where the danger is, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his experiences. Thank you, Mike.
Smells like sales professionals. I think Dustin's done a good job today. So I want to share with you a few insights that I've learned in my sales career, but first I want to share with you a story about how I actually got started in sales. It actually took place after college. I went to my father for some career advice. And I asked him, and actually when I told him my plan was I was going to be a financial planner. And to get started, I was going to be a stockbroker, a titan of industry. I was going to go after it, and then I would end up making tons of money managing other people's money. And he nodded supportingly. And then he looked at me and said, have you thought about going into sales and getting some sales skills? And I said, well, yeah, sure, sales skills, why not? He said, well, in fact, I actually did work for a company recently that might have a really great opportunity for you. And I said, oh, a great opportunity, can you tell me more about that? He said, well, they do direct sales. And I said, well, what is direct sales? And he said, well, they specialize in door-to-door residential sales. And I said, wait, cold calling? Door-to-door? I was like, Dad, I went to college, hey. And his facial expression changed. It went from the cordial Brian that you guys know to a serious expression. I can't quite do it, but you'd know it if you saw it. And he looked at me and he said, did you like your life? Did you like the house that you grew up in? Clothes on your back, opportunities to travel. he asked me about 10 more rhetorical questions before he paused, and he said, all of that was a direct result of me going out in my formidable youth and cold calling day after day and getting rejected and learning from it. And so the first insight or lesson I like to share with you is rejection is actually the best teacher. When you're going out and you're getting rejected, each rejection tells you what to say and what not to say. Tells you how fast you should be speaking or how slow you should be speaking. Tells you what benefits to highlight to certain customers. And it becomes a refining moment every day. You learn more faster by getting out there. There's actually whole businesses are created in big data and analytics about getting real-time feedback. As sales professionals, you get instant real-time feedback. You're standing in front of somebody and they're telling you yes or no, or why not. And so rejection, make rejection your best teacher. Second point is when I made a transition from direct sales, which are more transactional events, to more complicated technology and software sales, I needed a new framework to apply the law of averages. In a door-to-door situation, you make the sale on that call sometimes within 5-10 minutes. With complicated sales, there's multiple constituents, multiple stakeholders. Everybody's got different pain points, different benefits resonate with different people. And so I realized that in more complicated sales, there's actually 3 sales you have to make for every one real sale. And the first sale is yourself. When you first get introduced to somebody or get a chance to talk to them, you have about 30 seconds to convince them that A, you're respectable, B, you're an authority, or C, you're just likable enough for them to listen to you. Long enough for them to listen to your pitch, your 30-second pitch. The next thing you sell is for time. Before you can sell for money, you have to convince them to allocate time to hear about your product or service. And this is when you set the appointment. And the last thing that you sell is your product or your service. When you actually convince them to allot some time to actually listen to the features and benefits, then you can actually make your presentation. If you launch into your presentation on that first call, it usually ends up in some sort of disaster. And the third thing is creating a sense of urgency. And I know Dustin's probably covered creating a sense of urgency with your prospects, but this is creating a sense of urgency for yourself. All my best leaders and mentors and bosses, they've all been able to create an incredible sense of urgency around certain things. Getting more done, more phone calls, more revenue, being more productive, and they've been able to do that for other people. But the most successful people figure out how to do that for themselves. And it's easy to do that. You have your goals, ambitious, realistic goals with deadlines, and then some sort of accountability element. If you're very disciplined, you can keep yourself accountable. If you're not, ask your mom, ask your friends, or your work colleagues, or announce it publicly to make sure that they hold you accountable. Interesting story, Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War, and he talks about different types of ground that your forces might find themselves on. Some ground you have lots of options. If you're on an open field, you can retreat, you can flank, you can run around, you can maneuver. But he said that when you're facing a numerical superior force, and you need to win, victory is an absolute must, you have to put your forces on critical ground, or death ground, where there is no escape, there's no surrender, there's no retreat. The only thing that they can do is fight voraciously and hopefully win. He said if you do that, your forces will fight 10 times harder than the opposing force because they will have no options. And so if we can do that for ourselves, we can actually accelerate our productivity and get more done faster than we ever thought possible. So to recap, the 3 points, the 3 insights. First is embrace rejection. It's your best teacher. It will teach you faster than anyone. The second is break each sale down into its constituent parts. Focus on the increments. The first being yourself, building enough trust and rapport to get the appointment, which is the second. And the third is selling your product or service. And the fourth is create a sense of urgency so that you can go on and be proactive instead of reactive. I hope you find these points valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Michael didn't tell you, but in his first year of cold calling, he made 20,000 calls. That's like going over the top with a rifle to face the bullets 20,000 times. Imagine that. And his first experience, he made no sales at all, as you can imagine. And as time passed, What happened, Michael?
You got better and better. Oh, sorry. You get better and better. I mean, at first, the first few days you make nothing, and then you learn the pitch. You start making sales. Then you start increasing your ratio. So instead of knocking 20 or 30 doors, you knock 10, and you get a sale. So you get it down to 10%. Do you want me to re-mic you?
No, I'll be fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
And when I gave him that advice, I had made 20,000 calls in my first year as well. Best thing, I have met so many millionaires and wealthy people, even billionaires as a matter of fact, who started off and they just knocked on doors. They had no place to start except to just knock on doors and make calls. And they were absolutely terrified of it. I was so afraid. I remember I was knocking on doors, home doors. I'd be walking around the block, and I said I peed behind every bush around that block before I made my first call, because I was just quaking with fear. I was so nervous about knocking. And then I remember knocking on this one door, and this little old lady, my first door, I summoned up my courage to go in, and this one, I'm going to do it. It took about an hour of walking around the block. And the nicest little old lady answered the door, and she said, "Hello, son, how can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I've got this little product that I thought you might be interested." She said, "No, I don't think we use that in our house, but thank you very much for coming by." And I said, "Thank you," and she closed the door. And I walked away, and I said, "I've been walking around the block, terrified for an entire hour of going up and talking to this little old lady." I said, "I will never be afraid of knocking on a door again." Something broke inside of me. And after that, my whole life changed. So getting over the fear of rejection is, sometimes I use this example. What if somebody gave you a list? And this is a list of highly specialized prospects. It had been identified with big data, small data, and all of these people, it's a list of 100 people, all of them are in exactly the mindset they will buy today if you approach them. Now they may be a little bit reluctant or ask you questions but they're all going to buy today, not tomorrow or next day, but you have this list and you can start whenever you want in the morning, and every single person you see, you're going to make a sale. If somebody gave you a list like that, what would you do? How would you start your day? Would you go into the office and BS and check your email till 11 and then go for lunch and maybe make a call in the afternoon? Or would you start hitting it at 8 o'clock? Would you start moving as fast as you could from person to person? Would you run from possibility to possibility? Would you be weaving through traffic like a crazy person out of an adventure movie? You would be moving so fast, you would try to get to every single person you possibly could on that list. Isn't that true? That's exactly what you would do if you had no fear of rejection. When you overcome your fear of rejection, you become like a force of nature. You become unstoppable. And how do you overcome your fear of rejection? It's by getting rejected. So many times that finally you just don't care. Something snaps and you just don't care. From then on, you're friendly, you're cheerful, you're positive. If they're interested or not interested, yes, no, and on to the next one. Are you with me so far? Yep. All right. Well, here's another question for you, and then we're going to do a goal-setting exercise. The question is, what is your most precious resource? And your most precious resource is your time. And your time, as you know, I've done a lot of research on time, your time is really all you have to trade. When you start off at the beginning of your career, you have only one good to sell, which is your personal services. Almost all fortunes in America began with the sale of personal services. I know so many people. I'm going up to Silicon Valley tonight. I'm having a special dinner that's being catered by a French chef at a private home. And all of these people are gillionaires. And they all started with nothing,